9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, or 999, was a DS game from the late 2000s that kicked off the critically acclaimed Zero Escape series. It's a visual novel puzzle game that explores themes of what desperation can do to a person, how disconnecting from emotions can lead to poor decision-making, and how even monsters can be forgiven. It's a game that I have a lot of complicated feelings about because on the one hand, it has an incredibly engaging story with likable and sympathetic characters that overflow with personality. But on the other hand, it has a lot of contrived plot points that can threaten to shatter the suspension of disbelief for some players. In a similar vein to my Devil Survivor videos, it's not a game that I could easily recommend to everyone, but I think its story is incredibly engaging and that there's a good reason so many people consider it one of their favorite games ever, and to this day make videos about it. If you haven't played 999, I would highly recommend doing so first, but if you can't be bothered to play a 20-ish hour game and just want something to play in the background while you do other things, I guess that's fine too. So if you're ready to learn how this game asks you to forgive a monster and how sometimes you need to fail in order to succeed, let's go through the story of 999. The game starts with a cinematic of a ship at sea before cutting to a room where our main character wakes up. You play as Junpei, a seemingly bland college student who's just as confused by the situation as we are. 999 is a mystery game, but we don't even get a chance to learn about our POV character before being thrust into the thick of things. The only thing we have time to notice is that Junpei doesn't know how he got there, there's a mysterious bracelet with a 5 on his wrist, and we're stuck in this room, which is a problem we need to solve immediately as the nearby window breaks and the room starts flooding with water. As we work through the puzzle, Junpei gets a flashback to how he got kidnapped, which doesn't clarify that much, but at least tells us the last thing he remembers. We learn Junpei lives alone, and when he comes back to his room one day, he finds a stranger with a gas mask who knocks him out and tells him he's been chosen to play a little game. It's a little awkward to put this here while the room is flooding, and I don't think it would have disturbed the pacing too much to have this flashback happen before the puzzle begins, but that's more of a nitpick than anything else. In order to escape the room, we need to learn about digital roots. You can pause the video for a more detailed explanation, but the simple explanation is that you have to add all the numbers in a sequence until you get a single digit. This is a pretty good mechanic, both in the context of this as the game 999, and in the context of this as the nonary game that the characters are playing. There are a handful of puzzles that require you to understand digital root math, but it's mostly important for how you and the other players interact with one another, which will make more sense soon. As you escape, you run into an area that makes it seem like you're on an old cruise liner, and it doesn't take long for you to meet the rest of the cast, although introductions are delayed as they're in too much of a hurry to stop and introduce themselves. While sprinting after them, you enter a room with 2 doors that are reminiscent of the door you escaped earlier. It's here you meet Junpei's childhood friend, Akane Kurashiki. Junpei and Akane were very close when they were younger, but due to unspecified circumstances, they had to move away and didn't stay in touch. Despite that, the two still act just as close as they did when they were younger, but they don't have time to catch up before Zero, the one who kidnapped you all, appears over the speaker to explain the nonary game. The basic premise of the nonary game is that there are 9 players with bracelets corresponding to each member they have, 9 hours to reach the door with the number 9 on it, hence the name of the game, 999. The other contestants of this game are Ace, a calm, authoritative man with the first bracelet, Snake, a polite and blind man with the second bracelet, Santa, a sarcastic cynic with the third bracelet, Clover, Snake's younger sister with the 4th bracelet, the largest man in the room calls himself 7 because of his bracelet of the same number. Lotus, a woman who's apparently older than most of the cast, has the 8th bracelet, and as mentioned earlier, Junpei has the 5th bracelet. Every character I've listed so far, barring Junpei, has given an alias since 7 suggested everyone go by a code name. Junpei is not given an alias because Akane accidentally revealed his name before 7 made this suggestion. Since she revealed Junpei's name, she thinks it would be unfair to hide her own identity, but Junpei insists that she should and gives her the alias of June, as she possesses the 6th bracelet. The man with the 9th bracelet doesn't introduce himself. Only 3 to 5 people can enter a numbered door, and any group that wants to enter a door must have a combined digital root of the door's number. To demonstrate how this works, the man with the 9th bracelet very politely pulls out a knife, grabs Clover, and drags her to a door with a 5 on it. He then forces her and Ace to put their wrists on the scanner next to the door, and after he puts his own bracelet on the scanner, the door is unlocked and he goes through by himself. Here, we learn there is a risk to breaking the rules because after he enters, 3 to 5 people was a requirement, not a suggestion. Though you hear the explosion, you decide to see what happened behind the door, and although you, the player, only see a blood splatter, Junpei makes sure to describe in gruesome detail the state of the ninth man's cadaver. It's a pretty messed up scene that disturbs even the most stalwart members of the group and causes Akane to faint. Once she recovers, the group spends 90 in-game minutes of your 9 hours looking for alternative exits. After realizing, rather predictably, that there are no other exits, everyone finally decides to stop wasting time and go through the numbered doors, though they will need to split up and go through both even though there's still a horribly disfigured corpse on the other side of door 5. Seven and Snake decide to go through door 5 since Lotus and Santa adamantly refuse to go through it. This works out since Clover doesn't want to be separated from her brother, and Ace agrees to go with them, and with that they have a digital route that allows them to go through. Fortunately, everyone left in your group has a digital route that can go through door 4. All seems well, but Junpei unsubtly clues the player in that it might be better to insist on going through door 5, even though there's a corpse on the other side. Going through door 4 will let him stay with Akane, the only person Junpei knows, and everyone else is satisfied with the team arrangement. Despite all of that, there's an important reason one might want to go through that door, and it's precisely because of the corpse on the other side. When Zero explained the rules, they said the bracelets would only come off if a player escaped the ship or died trying. The way it's phrased makes it seem possible that the bracelets would work even if their owner is dead. This would make sense since if 7 people got themselves killed, the remaining 2 contestants would be unable to finish the game. Unfortunately, Junpei is his own person and not solely a vessel for the player, so since he didn't think of this, there's nothing we can do. In my first playthrough, I was thinking if I was there, I might have said, "Hey guys, can one of you see if the ninth man's bracelet is still intact, and if so, grab it? Thanks." This sadly isn't something I can make Junpei say, so I figure I'll just come back and grab it if I ever come back to this point. In the meantime, I'll go through door 4 since that seems like the smarter thing to do. The first time you go through a door is surprisingly tense despite it being in a visual novel format, and therefore nothing for you to do but read as your group tries to find the device that tells their wrist bombs not to blow up. Ultimately, there's nothing to fear, as whenever you go through a door, you always make it to the deactivation device, and it doesn't seem designed to kill the participants of the Nonary game by itself, at least when they're following the rules. It's more to ensure everyone works together whether they like it or not. As you go through the puzzles in these rooms, you learn a couple of things through visual novel sequences when you interact with everyone in your party. When you talk with Akane throughout the first few rooms, she relays supernatural anecdotes about the sinking of the Titanic being caused by the curse of a mummy, and a man who predicted the sinking of the Titanic well before it happened. They're strange conversations, but manage to show the connection these two must have shared despite their considerably different personalities. Junpei finds her anecdotes to be ridiculous, but doesn't try to ridicule her for believing them. Meanwhile, Akane manages to be very aloof, but also shows a sincerity in her beliefs while also having lines that show how sympathetic she is to the suffering of others. When Junpei mentions the possibility that the ship they're on might be a replica of the Titanic that was made as a marketing stunt, she finds the idea distasteful and thinks it'd be strange and cruel to monetize a monument that involved the suffering and deaths of many people. They view the world through very different lenses, but manage to be close anyway, which both shows the bond they must have shared and hints at them being very sympathetic to others, since they manage to get along with each other in spite of their differences, which contrasts nicely with the other members of your current team. We get to see just how strong this contrast is when we talk with Santa. You make some small talk with him, and he gives you a clover bookmark telling you that each leaf of the four-leafed clover has a different meaning, and that for some reason he hates four-leafed clovers. He's very insistent that we take it off his hands, and since there's no reason not to, Junpei pockets it for later. Arguably the most important thing you learn in this first area is the concept of the morphogenetic field. The morphogenetic field, at least how it's explained by Lotus, is the idea that there's a field invisible to the naked eye that can be used to transmit information. An example of how it would work would be many people being unable to identify an abstract photo of a dog, but as more people are able to identify it, that knowledge is put into the morphogenetic field and can be accessed by the whole of humanity, resulting in more people being able to identify the dog without being told. You could almost think of it as a collective consciousness. Despite Lotus being the one who brought it up, she dismisses the morphogenetic field as nothing more than pseudoscience and tells you not to worry about it too much. After entering the next puzzle set in a kitchen, you get trapped in the freezer, and rather than help, Lotus sits around doing nothing, which pisses everyone else off. She gives a somewhat reasonable answer that there was nothing she was able to do, but her lack of concern for your safety is enough to leave a bad impression. As you progress through the area, you make your way to a large hospital room with the numbered doors 3, 7, and 8, and their bracelet scanners that don't work. It turns out the other team got here before you and have been searching the area for the parts needed to get the door working. After splitting up for an in-game hour, you come back to find the numbered doors are working again, but one among you is missing. Snake. This causes Clover to freak out and go looking for him. Santa and Lotus say fuck it, we should go on without them, but Ace, Junpei, and Akane are determined to go looking for them. During this sequence, you and Akane meet with some of the characters alone, and one of the interactions shows more of Lotus being a little shit. She proposes that you team up with her and recruit 7 so that you can go through door 8, with the implication that you should abandon everyone and try to escape the ship. She tries to justify this by saying that we could get a rescue crew to save them after we escape, but Akane points out how that's bullshit since the ship will sink in 5 hours, and Junpei points out that they wouldn't be able to leave without Ace as well since they'd lack the numbers needed for the digital route of door 9. Despite this making Lotus look like even more of a piece of shit than when she did nothing while you were trapped in the freezer, I like this scene because it highlights a point a lot of stories fail to cover: the intersection of morality, emotions, and intelligence. Many people believe that emotions and intelligence are mutually exclusive concepts, the idea being that morality is something that belongs firmly in the land of emotions, whereas thinking logically would require putting emotions to the side. This is where you get attitudes like, facts don't care about your feelings, or other similar remarks that serve more to be inflammatory and confrontational rather than actually constructive. In this situation, wanting to get out of the ship as soon as possible is a reasonable desire, but Lotus thinks she's smarter than she actually is by acting like doing the immoral thing, abandoning the others to escape, is the logical thing to do. Both Junpei and Akane are trying to get everyone out because it's the right thing to do, but they're not being confrontational or just calling Lotus a bad person. They point out how her plan was at best poorly thought out and that trying to get people on her side, as if they're in a competition with one another, is counterproductive since it's in their best interest to work with everyone to get out. It also shows their level of emotional and intellectual maturity because they likely understand that it's in their interests to stay on good terms with Lotus since they will need her help to escape the ship. Working together is something they have to do whether they like it or not. It's a lot more interesting to show how the moral and logical thing to do can intersect, rather than solely disagreeing with her on moral grounds, since someone who's willing to do an immoral thing is unlikely to be swayed by those kinds of arguments. Despite all the shit I gave her, though, Lotus isn't a complete moron. When you fail to find Snake, it becomes clear that not everyone can go through the doors, and the only way to maximize the amount of people who can go through is to leave one person behind. This freaks some of the group out, even though Lotus is actually correct in this situation, but there's no real need to panic. Earlier, when you solved the puzzle in the kitchen, you used a map to determine where you would go, and one path you ignored because it would lead back to the starting area. With this in mind, it seems reasonable to assume you'll find a way back to these areas, especially because there were astrology-coded locked doors you couldn't open, that you'll presumably find the keys for in the future. Admittedly, that statement might sound smug coming from someone who's played the game and already knows that they meet back up anyway, but everything I said is something that could be deduced from available information. Ace decides it'd be best if he stays behind, so he knocks himself out with some medicine he got a hold of so no one could convince him to change his mind, and then you're left with the decision of who goes where. If the goal is to ensure the remaining 6 people can go through the doors you have access to, Santa saves you some trouble by doing the math to show who can go through what door. Junpei's options are to go through door 8 with Clover and Lotus, or door 7 with Clover and 7. No matter what you do, you can't go with Akane, and you can't go through door 3 without leaving even more people behind. Since I haven't been getting along with Lotus, I decided to go through door 7. Hopefully I can use this as an opportunity to talk to Clover since she's still depressed about her missing brother, and we can learn more about the Amnesiac 7. Oh, did I forget to mention he's amnesiac? Because the game did too until this point. Once you go through door 7, Clover and 7 start getting into a fight, and it seems like this is just the way they normally act around each other. It can be a little weird at first since this is the first time the idea that they don't like each other has been introduced, but I like it because we didn't get to see what they were up to behind door 5. This kind of banter that occurs regardless of how much the player was aware of it is something I appreciate, and it reminds you that these people don't only do things in a vacuum for the sake of the player. They have their own personalities and experiences independent of you. The 2 noteworthy conversations you have with your companions are helping 7 get back some of his memories and consoling the extremely worried Clover. When we talk with 7, we end up telling him about a substance called Ice-9 that Akane told us about when we were in the freezer earlier. Hearing the term Ice-9 seems to return some of his memories, and he tells us he's certain an Egyptian mummy who was frozen solid is on the Gigantic, the ship you believe you're on. Junpei suspects that this is related to a story Akane told him earlier about the curse of an Egyptian mummy being the reason the Titanic sank, but assumes it's a weird coincidence as there's no way this mummy known as All Ice, or Alice, could possibly be real, and moves on. Junpei's conversation with Clover begins after you complete the puzzle and get ready to leave, only to realize Clover stayed behind in the puzzle room. Clover tells you that she thinks her brother is dead, and if he is, then she's probably next. Not wanting her to wallow in this state of despair, Junpei relates the anecdote he learned from Santa back in the cabins behind door 4. When you give her the Clover bookmark and tell her what each of the leaves mean, she starts crying and thanking you. After she wipes away her tears, she asks Junpei what the word experiment means to him, and for a minute, Junpei seems shaken by the question, but tells himself that it shouldn't mean anything in particular to him. When Clover realizes he doesn't know what she's talking about, she tries to end the conversation, but Junpei's too concerned, and his concern leads her to trusting him. So she tells him about an experiment that took place on this very ship 9 years ago. She starts giving you some details about how the experiment was meant to test the morphogenetic field, but unfortunately, she gets interrupted by Seven, and for whatever reason, Clover doesn't want Seven to hear the story. As Seven and I suspected, we ended up circling back to the hospital room we left Ace in, but this was not a fruitless endeavor as we got several keys necessary for progressing, but not everyone is ready to go. After all, no one went through door 3. Clover wants to investigate since her brother might be on the other side. It's decided that while Seven, Ace, and Clover see what's behind door 3, everyone else will use the new keys to see what parts of the ship are now available. You end up finding doors 6 and 1, but when you return to the hospital room, you find Clover's team and learn, much to everyone's dismay, that Snake is dead. This information shakes everyone, but none are as shaken as Clover. Seven confides with the group that Snake was probably killed, as in deliberately thrown behind door 3 alone so his bomb would go off, just like the 9th man. Seven's theory is that at least 2 people in this group are killers, but Ace thinks that this is what Zero wants us to believe. Ace thinks Zero killed Snake and is trying to cause distrust so that there will be more losers at the end of the game. Finally, Clover theorizes that Zero is one of you. None of these theories are mutually exclusive, as Junpei points out. I think Zero could have a motivation to kill Snake for revealing his extra information at the beginning of the game, and as Santa points out earlier in the hospital room, all of these puzzles run automatically and don't require Zero's oversight. It would also explain what happened to the bracelet scanners earlier. Unfortunately, no one gives this theory too much credit since Junpei is unable to come up with a motive because apparently this world works on Ace Attorney logic. I think it's a little unfair how everyone shames Junpei for his theory, but with the clock going off and letting you know there's only 3 hours left to escape, the group decides there's no time to play detective and that they have to keep moving. After unlocking a path to door 2 with the card found behind door 3, the group decides to hold a vote for who goes through what door. This system was proposed by Junpei, and he goes last because he wants to see everyone's vote before giving his own, by having every answer on separate pieces of paper in his pocket so he can decide after he knows who goes where. I decide to go through door 6 because I want to have access to as many characters as possible, so I can put together as much information as I can, and at this point, I'm fond of characters like Ace, Santa, and Akane. Not long after you enter door 6, you find yourself in a boiler room and Akane faints again. While everyone is concerned, no one is particularly surprised or thinks too hard about why it occurred considering their situation. Being overwhelmed and exhausted is more natural than trucking along the way the rest of you have. This game is coming to an end though because there are only a few hours left to escape and there's only one door not accounted for. Door 9. After finishing this room's puzzle, you get Akane, who seems to be doing a lot better, and find Santa waiting on the steps looking at a picture of his sister. Santa is unusually melancholic looking at this picture, and his tone has none of the arrogance or cynicism it usually has. Instead, he looks like someone mired in regret. This is seemingly confirmed when he relays a story of the 2 Santa Clauses, one Santa who wore white and gave presents to good kids, and another that wore black and punished bad kids. Eventually, the Black Santa's tricks became too much and the White Santa killed him. That's why the popular version of Santa Claus wears red. It is the blood of his other half. Our Santa wonders which Santa he is after telling you he wanted to be a Santa for his little sister. Did he try to punish the bad and go too far, or did he try to help the good but in the end committed an unforgivable act? No matter which answer he arrives at, he would always remain guilty, a guilt he'd carry for the rest of his days. After listening to that story that I'm sure holds no significance, you leave the boiler room and after solving the puzzle in the cargo room, you find yourself face to face with door 9, or I should say both door 9s. It's here that you learn that the Nonary game was always meant to be winnable for every player. You spent a considerable amount of time up until this point talking about sacrifices and who will be left behind when they reach this door, since only up to 5 people can go through, but these conversations were never necessary since, if everyone is alive, then everyone can escape. Unfortunately, with the death of Snake, this becomes a problem. The ninth man's death was actually the least consequential in terms of who can go through the door, because by the nature of his number, 9 always makes a given digital root what it would be if 9 were not present. That is to say, if only one person had to die, the ninth man would be the only one that would not necessitate another person needing to stay behind. As it is, there doesn't seem to be a way for everyone to go through both doors with only the living player's bracelets. Unfortunately, there isn't much time to ponder this conundrum, because when you regroup with the other team, you learn that Clover has gone missing. You decide to split up, and when you go down an elevator, you find a stabbed Lotus. Okay, shit, that's really, really bad. I may not have liked her that much, but I didn't want her dead! The fact that she's near the elevator means either her killer has to have just gone up, or is still nearby, but since we didn't see anyone, that must mean... Seven, Snake, Clover, and Ace volunteer to go through door 5, and they all have a digital route that will let them go through. This works out well since everyone else is very reluctant to go through the door with a corpse on the other side. All seems well, but Junpei rather unsubtly clues the player in that it might be better to insist on going through door 5, even though there's a corpse on the other side. Going through door 4 will let you stay with Akane, and everyone else is satisfied with the team arrangement. Despite all of that, there's an important reason one might want to go through that door, and it's precisely because of the corpse on the other side. The way Zero explained the rules makes it seem possible that the bracelets would work even if their owner is dead. The possibility that the bracelet works is too good to pass up, so I insist on going through door 5 instead. Fortunately, Snake is able to convince Clover and Ace to switch teams with Junpei, and we're able to go through. If you're wondering why an extra bracelet is too good to pass up, consider the following. The current situation only has 2 doors. But if there were ever a situation with 3 doors, all 3 could not be fully explored at the same time because there would be one team of 2. If the ninth man's bracelet still works, we might be able to explore more effectively and might not be slowed down by the ninth man's death. That is admittedly very macabre, and as an extremely squeamish person, I don't know if I would be able to bring myself near such a gruesome corpse to loot. But as a one-step removed player character, I can just make the poor protagonist do it. Going through the first numbered door is unsurprisingly tense. It is, after all, hard to not feel tense when you see the result of failure right in front of you, even though you know that, unlike him, you have every reason to believe you'll get through alright since you're following the rules. The deactivation device is easy enough to find, and getting to the next room is simple, but before we go through, we get a more thorough look at the ninth man's body, and my suspicions are confirmed. The bracelet is still intact. Unfortunately, there is no option to take it, but since Junpei is his own person and not solely a vessel for the player, I guess this makes sense. I did say if I was in this situation, I probably wouldn't be willing to grab the bloodstained bracelet, so I can't give Junpei too much shit. Besides, it's possible the bracelet doesn't even work unless someone is wearing it, so I guess this decision was for nothing. After going through the next room and completing the puzzle, we learn a few odd things. First of all, Seven apparently has amnesia, although doesn't seem to mind this fact too much and figures his memory will just come back eventually. Secondly, despite solving the puzzle in the room, we never end up opening a very conspicuous safe. We never found anything that could be used as a code in this room, so it's reasonable to assume, since everything else so far has been meticulously placed, that we'll end up coming back to this room. That's almost certainly the reason why Seven leaves a plate in the doorway so it stays open. That way we can come back here if and when necessary. For some reason, Seven tries to dodge the question of why he did it, even though the explanation I just gave is perfectly reasonable, and isn't the sort of thing that's necessary to hide unless one has an ulterior motive. Actually, now that I think about it, Seven's behavior seems a bit off. He's the one who suggested that we all go by code names rather than our real names so that Zero won't know who we are, on the off chance they don't know anything about us and just randomly kidnapped the first 9 people they found. This is bizarre because 1, Zero explicitly told us when they kidnapped Junpei that we were chosen, meaning it's unlikely we're just the first 9 people Zero could get a hold of. Secondly, even if this line of reasoning did make sense, it's not as if Zero could do too much with only our first names. The only purpose this really serves is keeping the names of each contestant hidden from one another, but even that seems pointless since, if anyone wanted to keep their name a secret, they could just lie. Hell, even being the only person in the group to have amnesia is a bit strange. And Junpei seems to agree with me since his internal thoughts have him saying that Seven apparently has amnesia, implying a level of doubt. In fact, he even asks Seven if he's lying, but if Seven was lying, it would be silly to expect him to just say, "Yeah, lol, I was lying." We'll have to put these suspicions to the side, though, because when we get to the next set of numbered doors, we find that none of them are working. Not long after, the other group meets up with you and you explain the situation to them. Since there are several rooms that haven't been searched yet, the group decides to split up to see if they can find the parts. After about an hour, you come back to find the numbered doors are working again, but one among you is missing. Snake. During this sequence, you have the chance to meet and talk with several of the characters, and going back to the hospital room leads to a conversation with Santa. Santa tries to figure out who fixed the machines and brings up the possibility that whoever did it might have done something to Snake. One of the things he says towards the end of the conversation that I'm sure will hold no significance is,
とにかくこのゲームは誰かを信じたら負けになる。お前らも気をつけるといい。一番信頼してる相手が裏切り者かもしれないぜ。
Santa's point that whoever fixed the numbered doors might have done something to Snake is interesting because of the ambiguous phrasing. What does he mean by done something? The implication is that they brought some harm upon Snake, but when we talked with Snake earlier, he made it very clear that in spite of his blindness, he's more than capable of getting around without help and is very confident in his physical abilities, stating he thinks you could take any ruffian who challenged him to a fight. Assuming someone did harm Snake, the only thing I could think of them doing is to kidnap or kill him. In either case, they'd need to hide the body, and given the locked nature of the ship, there's only so many places that could be. Ace decides it'd be best if he stays behind, so he knocks himself out with some medicine he got a hold of so no one could convince him to change his mind, and then you're left with the decision of who goes where. If the goal is to ensure the remaining 6 people can go through the doors you have access to, Santa saves you some trouble by doing the math and showing you who can go through what door. Your options are to go through door 8 with Clover and Lotus, or door 7 with Clover and 7. No matter what you do, you can't go with Akane, and you can't go through door 3, without leaving even more people behind. On the one hand, I'm getting a little suspicious of 7, but on the other hand, Lotus has been saying some things that imply selfish goals, so I also want to keep an eye on her. Since I haven't spent much time with Clover or Lotus yet, I decide to go with them, especially since, despite my disdain for her, Lotus has no reason to believe I don't trust her. After entering door 8, we find ourselves in a strange laboratory, and it doesn't take long for someone to do something stupid and trigger the puzzle. Clover gets herself trapped in a corner of the room, and it's up to us to try to get her out while she does what she can in her corner. As you work through the puzzle, you get to a computer that has barely discernible information, and it seems like you're going to have to look for a password, but luckily, Lotus happens to have experience with cybersecurity and hacks the computer to bypass that step. We never do find a password in the room, so it's entirely possible that without Lotus or someone else who knows how to hack, then we'd be entirely screwed. Junpei notes this and declares he's going to stop being so reliant on others, which is a weird statement to make, but whatever. It's actually really strange that hacking this computer to solve this part of the puzzle worked in the first place, because the limit of her hacking is just unlocking a puzzle to solve. It might just be a primitive computer, but surely the puzzle couldn't have been designed this way. Unless advanced coding knowledge was something the average contestant here had, which, as Junpei makes apparent by his lack of technical skill, isn't the case, this puzzle could only be solved by someone who could hack, which, as far as I can tell, is only Lotus. This is weird because there are several other possible combinations of participants that could have gone through door 8. What if Santa, Ace, and Clover went through this door? If none of them had experience with hacking, they'd be screwed. Granted, there might be a password that no one discovered, but if that's the case, it's weird to think that this hacking worked in the first place. After all, if someone had, say, engineering experience, what if they found a way to bypass the bracelets or the authentication machines in front of every door? This whole scenario is as weird as Lotus's ramble about the nature of human consciousness. She wonders if human thoughts occur outside the body, and what if things like Seven's memory loss or bodily issues such as blindness or prosopagnosia aren't a case of people being literally incapable of seeing or recognizing faces, but that some part of their bodily hardware is malfunctioning? I'm starting to get some deja vu here. After solving the computer puzzle, we talk to Clover and learn that Snake isn't only blind, but has a prosthetic arm. Depending on the nature of his prosthetic, this might tie into why he was so confident he could win a fight, and if it was a prosthetic that would give him an advantage in a fight, that limits the number of people who could hurt him, and if they did, possibly how they hurt him. Unfortunately, this intrigue is cut short because Clover caused a fire and we need to ditch this room and hope the fire doesn't spread. After escaping, we end up in a hallway with everyone we split up from, and everyone except for Seven is surprised, but he calmly reminds them that this was always going to be the case. After all, going through those doors meant they inherently don't have the people to open door 9 and finish the game. You might think that I'd say this makes him seem suspicious, but I'm not inclined to say that because it's a perfectly reasonable conclusion, and one I also came to, so I don't exactly have grounds to distrust him. After meeting up with Ace and sharing the information and keys they found, everyone except Clover is ready to move on. She wants to go through door 3 on the off chance Snake is on the other side. Because Ace sat out on the last bout, he decides he'll accompany her, and by necessity they bring Seven along as well, while the rest check the doors they can now open. Unfortunately, when we return to the hospital room, we find that Clover's team has returned and informs us that Snake is dead. This information shakes everyone, and the characters who aren't in shock over the fact that someone is dead are putting two and whatever their bracelet is together and realizing that this will make it harder to escape by virtue of there being less bracelets. Seven huddles up with everyone other than Clover due to not wanting to cause her any more stress than she's already feeling, and tells us that he suspects that there are murderers in their ranks. His theory is that two people forced Snake to open door 3 with his and their bracelets and then threw him in alone, causing his bomb to go off, just like the Ninth Man. This is making me question if Seven really is as untrustworthy as I thought he was back in the puzzles behind door 5. This is a reasonable line of thought, but I don't think he would have been the one to bring it up if he had done the math. His theory requires two people in addition to Snake's 2 bracelet to force him through door 3, meaning that unless he's insinuating that the team of killers encompasses almost half of them, the only 2-person teams that could be responsible with the bracelets of each person present are Seven and Santa or Akane and Clover. It seems incredibly unlikely that Akane and Clover would have done it, especially with Snake being her brother who she clearly cares about. If you're suspicious of Seven, then you might argue he's bringing it up as a form of reverse psychology to make you think, if he's the one who did it, then why would he draw suspicion onto himself? But that level of 4D chess seems unlikely, especially because once somebody does the math, he'd need to come up with an alibi for why he didn't do it. And as Junpei points out, no one has an alibi. If I was one of the killers, my first thought would be to try to give a plausible explanation that handily diverts attention from me as a suspect while making it seem like I'm not doing that. In fact, I'd probably do what Ace does and say Zero did it. It makes enough sense, and it puts on the pretense that you're trying to keep everyone on the same side and stop internal fighting. This would make me suspicious that Ace was the one who did it, but for him to do it, he'd need either a working 9 bracelet, which he shouldn't have since he went through door 4, or he'd need to be on a killer team with Akane and Santa, or Junpei and Clover. And since we didn't kill Snake, and it seems very unlikely that Akane would, it seems safe to assume Ace didn't do it. We get interrupted by the tolling bell letting us know that we only have 3 hours to escape, so we agree that it's best to move on as fast as possible. After finding the next 3 doors, everyone holds a vote for who will go through what door. This system was proposed by Junpei, and he goes last because he waits to see everyone's votes before giving his own by having every answer in his pocket so he can decide after he knows who goes where. I decide to go through door 6 because doing so creates a team of 4, and since, as Junpei, I can trust Akane, this lets us keep tabs on Santa. As we make our way through the puzzle, something feels off, like the puzzle is easier or perhaps more intuitive than the others so far. It doesn't take very long to solve, and as we solve it, Santa gives an anecdote about lab rats solving a puzzle on their own. He tells us the rats were used in an experiment where they're put in a tank full of water and have to overcome their natural tendency to go where they can see and take a route through darkness that lets them escape or else they drown. What's interesting about the experiment is that over multiple generations, using different rats than the ones who were essentially trained to solve the puzzle correctly, rats in a lab far away from the initial one that were unrelated to the original ones were capable of solving the puzzle much faster, almost like a sped-up telepathic evolution. When Junpei asks why there needs to be a risk of drowning, Santa tells him that being in a dangerous situation puts the brain into overdrive and makes it easier to have an epiphany. This idea, much like Lotus's talk of detached consciousness, resonates with the idea of the morphogenetic field, and it feels more resonant now than it did when Lotus brought it up back in the laboratory. That feeling of déjà vu is getting stronger, almost like I've done this puzzle before. After finishing this room's puzzle, you get Akane, who seems to be doing a lot better, and find Santa waiting on the steps looking at a picture of his sister. He then tells you that his parents died when he was young, so every year he'd save up all his money to buy his sister whatever presents she asked Santa for. That's the reason he chose his name. It doesn't take a genius to read between the lines or just look at his face to tell that his sister suffered some form of tragedy, but Akane decides to press him on it, and when she asks what happened,
死んじまったんだよ。殺されたんだ。今から9年前に。
the last wish he got from her was to stay happy together for a really long time, but he wasn't able to make that wish come true. Once he put away the photo, he quickly gets his act together and goes back to his old cynical and sarcastic personality, but it's hard to not feel how much the mood has sunk. I feel a little disgusted at the part of me that says he might be lying. He is, after all, still a suspect for being Snake's killer, but the idea that someone would lie about that or strain themselves in such a way is gross to think about. I can't see anything he'd gain by lying about this story other than to make me pity him and lower my guard around him, but even then there are arguably more effective ways he could try to avert my suspicion. If he wanted to convince me he wasn't Snake's killer, he'd concoct an alibi or give a plausible explanation that would absolve him of suspicion and try to make me doubt he was the killer. This just reads like a truly heartbroken boy who shouldered an immense responsibility to keep his only family happy and feels responsible for failing to grant her wish. Depressing as that was, the clock is still ticking and there's one more room to explore. Once again, I get a feeling of deja vu as I work my way through the puzzle. We end up getting cards needed to solve a very simplistic puzzle of matching faces of the contestants to their numbered bracelets, but before we can solve it, Akane collapses. As Junpei sees this puzzle as incredibly simple, he leaves the task to Ace and makes sure Akane is okay. Santa was luckily nearby to help, and it doesn't look like her fever is back, but she's having trouble standing, so clearly she's not in great shape. Here, Santa casually lets us know that Ace is apparently the president of a company called Cradle Pharmaceuticals that made an anesthetic called Sopril. Apparently Ace told him this back when they split up at the first set of doors. This Sopril is the same drug Ace used to knock himself out earlier, but what we learned from Santa's explanation is that at room temperature, it becomes a gas, and given that it's a very powerful anesthetic, maybe it's just a coincidence. After all, there are plenty of forms of knockout gas, and if this gas was Sopril, I would hope Ace would recognize it and let us know. It is a popular drug, so it wouldn't necessarily help us identify Zero, but I think I'm going to keep a closer eye on Ace, just to be safe. Speaking of keeping an eye on him, he seems to be having trouble solving the puzzle that only requires you to put people's cards with their respective number, which is well known to the group, but for some reason he's struggling. He says he's having a hard time seeing and asks to sit down for a bit, but his reaction seems off. Unlike Akane, who passed out for the same reason he's giving, he doesn't look sickly, but rather panicked. He is substantially older and glibly remarks about his age, so I don't want to give him too much shit for this. After all, I wouldn't have given Snake any shit for failing to solve this puzzle because, by the nature of his blindness, he couldn't solve it. Junpei suspects Ace might have prosopagnosia, the inability to distinguish faces, but that's just speculation, and if it's true, it doesn't seem too relevant for the time being. After finishing the puzzle, we find a coffin with a key needed to get ahead, and a gun. It looks pretty old, and it's questionable if it's even a real gun, but in any case, the group makes the rather rash decision to leave it behind. Their reasoning is that the gun is here to make us turn on one another, but that's only one possible explanation. It's equally, or possibly more likely, that this gun is here to be used on a puzzle later on. It is, after all, with a key needed to progress, so leaving the gun here means if we do need it, we'll need to come back later. I understand tensions are high with the possibility of a killer being in our ranks, but in that case maybe it would be best to have one person hold the gun and everyone would hold one bullet. That way the gun could theoretically be used democratically. This does give the gun holder disproportionate power, but if they ever try to get a bullet without consulting the rest of the group, that would look extremely suspicious. But since there's a possibility that there are multiple killers, I suppose that idea could easily backfire. After solving the puzzle, you finally find it, the 9th door, or I should say both 9th doors. Unfortunately, there isn't much time to ponder this conundrum because when you regroup with the other team, you learn that Clover has gone missing. You decide to split up, and when you check the hospital room, Junpei decides to check Snake's corpse to see if that's where Clover ran off to. When we take a closer look at his corpse, Junpei notices something he didn't see before. This body has an arm. A left arm. I'm a little surprised Junpei can discern which arm is which if the body is as disfigured as he describes, but that's not important. This corpse has a left arm. That means it can't be Snake. Back in the lab, Clover told us that he has a fake arm, so there shouldn't be any bone from that arm. This is definitely Snake's clothing, and that is a number 2 bracelet on the ground, but if Clover was telling the truth, this couldn't possibly be Snake. This raises a lot of questions. Most importantly, if this isn't Snake, where is he? Who is this? And who killed him? If this wasn't Snake, the killers would surely know unless the guy happened to look exactly like Snake, or... Junpei suspects Ace might have prosopagnosia, the inability to distinguish faces, but that's just speculation, and if it's true, it doesn't seem too relevant for the time being. Before we have too much time to follow that train of thought, or perhaps because we're following this train of thought, we make our way to the first-class cabin, the puzzle beyond door 5, and the location of the 9th man's corpse. There we find that Clover has been... stabbed. Seven's the one who discovered her body, and if it weren't for the discovery that the man behind door 3 wasn't Snake, I'd immediately assume Seven is the killer. After all, the next logical target after killing Snake would be his sister. But if that isn't Snake, there is one possibility that opens up. One that requires checking the ninth man's corpse. After interrogating Seven, he lets us know that he kept this door open due to the safe from earlier. It didn't sit right with him that we never opened it and figured it'd be good to have a way to get back here. After hearing this, we finally check the ninth man's body and... Motherfucker. Frankly, my first thought is annoyance because I wanted to take this bracelet earlier but didn't have the chance, and yeah, I was considering this when I first played the game, but after the annoyance dissipates, everything becomes clear. If the ninth man's bracelet still works, then a suspect who was dropped earlier no longer has an alibi, someone who would confuse a person wearing Snake's clothing for the man himself. Before we oust Clover's killer, Seven gives us a note he found on her body. The note gives a riddle that reveals a code on our bracelets, the code needed to unlock the safe. The note inside was left by Zero, and it tells us that 1. There was a nonary game played here 9 years ago. 2. Snake was a participant in that game. And 3. It was planned by the CEO of Cradle Pharmaceuticals and others in his company. Zero intends to punish the ones behind the nonary game 9 years ago for the lives they sacrificed. Junpei asks everyone here to follow him to the hospital room, where he makes the dramatic reveal that Ace, or rather CEO of Cradle Pharmaceuticals Gentaro Hongo, is the killer. He killed Clover and the man behind door 3, thinking he was Snake. If Snake participated in a nonary game orchestrated by Gentaro, then it would make sense that he'd want to silence any witnesses. After revealing our evidence, Gentaro has a truly spectacular meltdown. First, we trick him into revealing his prosopagnosia and explain that we learned that the man behind door 3 isn't Snake, and if you combine that information with the missing ninth bracelet, the answer becomes clear. 1, 2, and 9 has a digital root of 3, the same number needed to open door 3, and with that, Ace drops the act and reveals his true nature.
Heh お見事だよ、淳平君。確かに君の言った通り、私は今、9番のバングルを持っている。入手したのは、抜き取られたレッドの基盤を全員で捜索していた時だ。
He explains how he got the ninth bracelet, why he killed who he thought was Snake and Clover, and how he believes Zero tricked him into committing these murders. As much as I love his little breakdown, what happens next kind of pisses me off. He pulls out the gun we found in the cargo room. Now, the explanation for leaving behind the gun did make some level of sense, and if it was only leaving behind the bracelet or leaving behind the gun, I might not mind so much, but this foolish reasoning leading to these consequences is more than a little annoying, especially given how clever Junpei proves himself to be in this interrogation. Gentaro grabs Lotus and threatens to shoot her if any of us try to stop him. He reveals he tricked the ninth man into breaking the rules of the nonary game so he could get him killed, take his bracelet, and see if the nonary game would go through with its promise to kill those who break the rules. With Lotus and the ninth bracelet, he's capable of opening the 9 door, and to make matters worse, Akane faints again, meaning we need to leave her with Santa while Junpei and Seven go after them. Unfortunately, Gentaro and Lotus already got through one of the 9 doors, and with the numbers we have, there's no way to chase after him. Or at least there wouldn't be, if not for 2 very handy reveals. The first reveal is that Seven had found a Zero bracelet on Clover's body, meaning they had an extra one to work with. The second comes with the extremely creepy banging we hear from the nearby coffin.
なんだな
あの辺りから聞こえてきてるな。
棺
Upon using the code from earlier to unlock the safe, we open the coffin to reveal an alive, if disoriented, Snake. With him, they now have another bracelet, but unfortunately the only way they can go through is if they leave Junpei behind. Or, I guess not. For some reason, the Zero bracelet doesn't function as a 0, and with some testing, we find it actually functions as a 6. This does mean that with Junpei and Seven's bracelet, they can go through, but would have to leave Snake behind. But in another stroke of good luck, Snake's bracelet happens to be on his prosthetic, so he can just break it off and come with us anyway. It does beg the question of why this bracelet is even 6, especially if this is supposed to be the 0 bracelet. It could have just been a catch-all to unlock any and every door, but for some reason it's 6 specifically. I sure hope this isn't some questionable foreshadowing or anything. What we find at the end of the tunnel is an incinerator that closes upon our entering, and we reunite with Gentaro and Lotus. It's here that our efforts to keep Clover's death a secret from Snake fail, as Gentaro describes in gleeful detail how he murdered her, causing Snake to go into a frenzy, attack, and... But Snake refused to die.
じゃあな。
してやる。
バカな。
殺してやる。殺してやる。
来るな。それ以上近づいてみろ。今度こそ本当にお前を。聞こえないのか。来るなと言ってるだろうが。くそー、この死に族のイベー。
Incineration will start in 3 minutes.
今度こそシン。
殺して捕まえたぞ。
貴様バカ者か。話すんだ。くそ。
Incineration will start in 1 minute.
くそ、ダメだ。もう時間がない。行くぞ、ジュンペイ。
純平君、何をやってる。早く行け。
ニルさん、待て、妖精。バカな真似はやめろ。
嫌だニルスを助けるんだ。ニルスを離せ。
Incineration will start in 10 seconds. 7, 6.
くそ、仕方ねえ。悪く思うなよ。
5, 4, 3, 2,
せやれよ。
1, 0.
It's too late for them. All that's left of Gentaro and Snake are their ashes. Even if Junpei had gotten him out with those wounds, he would have died once the adrenaline wore off. We failed to save Clover, and we failed to save Snake. Despite not knowing him very long, I can feel for Junpei's desire to save him. It's insane and frantic, but his desire to save Snake feels too understandable, too real. It hurts listening to each guttural kick Gentaro delivered to Snake's face as he lamented his inability to save Clover. The most heart-wrenching thing is that the incinerator had a fucking window cut into it, meaning Junpei had to watch as they burned to death. We at least managed to get Lotus back, but the time limit is almost up, and even if we bring Santa and Akane here, we don't have a digital route to leave. Maybe if we can get the bracelets of some of the dead, we can get everyone else out. Maybe we can finally escape this nightmare. We get back to the hospital room, but they're not here. I guess Akane recovered from her collapse and they went after us. Time is of the essence, but no matter where we go, Santa and Akane are nowhere to be found. Oh, never mind, there's Akane. She's passed out on the floor, but she's been doing that for the past few hours, so it should be fine. We'll get her up, find Santa, and escape. She wakes up as expected, but something seems wrong. She has no wounds, but she looks like she can barely keep herself awake. She's been through a lot, so it's not a big deal if she rests, but the music's a bit too sad, and she doesn't look tired. It almost looks like she's ethereal. She's unnaturally cold, and she says she might not make it, but I don't know why. She hasn't suffered any wound, and while she hasn't been super healthy, what she's suffering from shouldn't be life-threatening. Much as I want to live up to my namesake as the Hobbit optimist, I know my tropes. I know she isn't going to make it, less because she's displaying signs of imminent death, but more because that's what the vibes are telling me. Zero says that it's game over the speakers, and Junpei makes the foolish decision to follow the voice, and when he returns, Akane is gone. Zero tells Junpei he chose the wrong path, but that this was all necessary. Junpei refuses to accept that he's lost, but he misunderstood. Junpei isn't the one suffering from a game over. It's Zero. And me. If the goal is to ensure the remaining 6 people can go through the doors you have access to, Santa saves you some trouble by doing the math and showing who can go through what door. Your options are to go through door 8 with Clover and Lotus, or door 7 with Clover and 7. No matter what, you can't go with Akane, and you can't go through door 3 without leaving even more people behind. But, like I said, we're all likely to meet up again anyway, so it doesn't really matter if all 6 remaining people go through. With that in mind, maybe we should go through door 3, and by we, I suppose I mean Junpei, 7, and Akane. We'll need either Santa or Clover and Lotus to get through, but if we take this path, we won't split up from Akane. Personally, I can't say I care about Akane more than any other character at this point, but she's obviously extremely important to Junpei. The reasoning Junpei uses if we, as the player, tell him to go through door 3 is that he wants to stay with Akane. This almost makes Junpei seem like a psycho because he hasn't expressed the confidence that the groups will meet up again that 7 has, and if anything, if he was so sure the groups would meet up again, he wouldn't care so much about splitting from Akane. His lack of care is emphasized when he says he doesn't care if Santa or Clover and Lotus complete their digital route. Santa runs past Lotus and Clover and ensures he isn't the one left behind, and Junpei finds this perfectly acceptable. I wish we had brought Clover and Lotus since I'm worried about Clover, and having both Clover and Akane with Junpei would be good for keeping an eye out for both of them, but there's nothing to be done now. All that's left is to go through and... wait, what's that squishy splashing noise?
おい、こいつは爆死だな。あの9番の男と同じだ。バングルの起爆送信機が作動して、体内の小型爆弾が炸裂したんだろう。ひどい。全身めちゃくちゃだ。
God, I already found the descriptions of the ninth man's body to be a lot, but this... At least we were able to go into another room to get away from the body before, but now we're locked in the room with what used to be Snake. I guess it's a good thing we didn't bring Clover, because this would have ruined her life. It's bad enough that we brought Akane with us because of having to see the ninth man's body did a number on her. This is so much worse. She starts panicking and desperately throws herself at the door, begging for all of this to stop. She just can't take it anymore. Junpei has to drag her away before she hurts herself, and she just collapses. Despite the game having very limited animation and this whole sequence being just text and sound effects, it hits hard. The squishy sound effects when you walk through Snake's blood, the door slamming effect, the punctuated text. Playing on the DS version made me shiver as I wrote this part of the script. Akane is able to calm down once Junpei holds her for a bit and tells her that everything will be okay, and that he won't leave her. It takes all her effort to stop crying, but at least she isn't actively hurting herself anymore. She believes Junpei can and will protect her. After getting her to calm down, we start working through the room. After a bit of searching, Akane reminisces on a time Junpei looked out for her when they were younger. When they were in elementary school, they were in charge of taking care of their class's pet rabbits, but one day, some middle school boys had snuck in and butchered them. Akane wanted to catch the killers, so Junpei went with her to stay up all night with the other animals to catch them, but luckily no one showed up. Junpei points out if the culprit had shown up, they might have been in danger too, but Akane said she didn't worry because he was there with her. This is the first time we get an insight into their history beyond what we were told in the beginning. Before this, they'd flirt with each other and get embarrassed, and we knew they were childhood friends, but now we get more of a picture of their relationship. We already knew that Junpei had a crush on her, but here we learn there's a bit more to it than that. Akane was a lonely kid growing up, and Junpei was one of her only friends. This is partially why she tried to handle something as dangerous as attempting to stop someone from killing animals. She didn't have many connections, and she hated cruelty. It's why she felt, as long as she had Junpei with her, they'd be able to handle whatever came their way. This flashback shows that both of them were incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. Junpei points out how dangerous trying to catch the killer was, but he only understands that with the benefit of hindsight. At the time, all he cared about was not wanting to leave Akane alone and dealing with the consequences later. Although they've both aged into adults since then, traces of their childhood tendencies can still be seen with Akane's aloofness and trust in Junpei, and the logic Junpei uses to go through door 3 shows that Akane is still his highest priority. This does raise an important question, though. If they were so important to each other, why, or maybe how, did they lose touch? Even if one moved away, surely they could have called, or if this is some weird world where phones aren't commonplace, sent letters as long as both of them didn't move. It just seems strange given how, even after all these years, they still care just as much for each other as they did when they were kids, even though it's been almost a decade. As we work towards finishing the puzzle, looking at a thermometer makes Santa look sad, and he talks about how most things will die after they reach over 107 degrees Fahrenheit, and how fevers aren't supposed to go that high. I don't know why he's bringing this or incinerators up, but based on his troubled expression, this is clearly something he has history with, which makes Junpei's dismissive joke a little messed up. After finally escaping, we make our way back to the hospital room, and before we can tell them what happened, Junpei immediately gets slapped by Lotus, and fair enough, honestly. They thought he was leaving them to die, but tensions don't exactly settle once we inform them of Snake's demise. After we see where the keycard we found leads, we end up face to face with door 2. The team they end up sending through ends up being Junpei, Seven, and Lotus. Another team that would have worked just as well would have been Junpei, Lotus, Akane, and Ace, but unfortunately Seven volunteered, and given the bad rep Junpei's gotten from his stunt with door 3, telling the person who volunteered not to go in favor of the people he'd want to bring probably wouldn't go over well. It also makes sense to leave more people behind because now they have more options to backtrack and go through doors 7 and 8 if they want to find more keys. Once we go through the door, we find ourselves in what looks to be some sort of prison. As we work through the puzzle, Seven takes a note from Akane's book and collapses. He's been doing every numbered door possible, so it is natural to get tired, but the expression Junpei describes doesn't give that impression. He looks like he's getting a migraine. No, wait. He got some of his memories back. He's been here before. He starts listing unfamiliar names as he fills us in on what he's remembered. Apparently there was some kind of experiment being held on this ship, and Seven seems to have been present when it happened. This would explain where part of his confidence that the group would meet up again came from, and it would explain why he was certain they were on the Gigantic. It seems Seven was working as a detective in a case of kids being kidnapped 9 years ago, and the names he listed are presumably some of those kids. Junpei starts to get cagey listening to Seven's half-remembered rambles, and although he doesn't know why, he's convinced that whatever Seven is remembering is very, very important. Seven tells us the story of how he got captured by Cradle and ended up on the same ship as the kids they kidnapped for their twisted experiment. Luckily, he was able to escape through a vent despite his large size, but unfortunately that's all Seven can remember. He gets the feeling he failed to save one of them, a little girl who ended up dying. He doesn't remember the specifics, but there's tears in his eyes, and he doesn't want to talk about what few memories he has access to anymore. This raises many questions, but unfortunately there aren't many answers. If Seven's memory is to be believed, we're likely on the same ship that was used in the experiment 9 years ago, but what does that tell us? Is Cradle connected to Zero? I don't have any evidence from the doors I've gone through so far, but I get the feeling that this isn't the case. Hopefully we'll learn more as we progress through door 2. The next room we get into is unmistakable. It's a torture room. There are rusted instruments on a nearby table and an electric chair in the center. As if this place isn't creepy enough, there's a dead shark beneath the glass under the electric chair, and worse yet, to solve the puzzle, one of us needs to sit in the chair. Shockingly enough, it's Lotus who volunteers to do it. In spite of her earlier selfishness and attempts at factionalizing, she's the one taking the risk by sitting in the chair. Despite her confidence in volunteering, she still feels hesitation. She's afraid that if she sits in this chair, she won't be getting out of it. Before she sits down, she asks us to tell her daughters she loves them, and lets it slip that one of their names was Nona. Nona was one of the names Seven listed earlier, and when Seven confirms her last name, we get a little closer to understanding the situation. Lotus is related to the Nonary Games. Her daughter was a participant in one 9 years ago. Luckily, it seems like she was one of the kids who was saved by Seven, but now we know at the very least there's a direct connection between the pasts of Lotus and Seven to the Nonary Games. If Lotus's daughters were 2 of the 16 kidnapped kids for this experiment, what if that could explain why the others are here? It can't be a coincidence that these 2 are now participating in a Nonary game. There has to be a reason all of us were chosen, and now we might know why 2 of the 9 were chosen. Lotus has done her own investigation into what happened to her kidnapped daughters because they wouldn't talk about it, and she couldn't bring herself to force them to relive their trauma. But she had to know what happened. Sadly, her investigation bore no answers, and we don't know why the first Nonary game took place, or why children were kidnapped to play it. Getting back to the puzzle, fortunately Lotus is unharmed and we get to walk away scot-free. When we go to look for the others, they're nowhere to be found. It doesn't look like they're in any of the numbered doors, so maybe they're already done? Or perhaps they unlocked a new path we'll need to go find. In any case, we have a new key so we can open a door from earlier and maybe we'll find them, or a previously locked door open along the way. We run into a door locked with the Jupiter key, which we don't have, but luckily we don't need it since it's already unlocked and on the other side... They're dead. Ace, Santa, Clover. They're all dead. Akane is nowhere to be found. They've all been... stabbed. Akane's not here. That might mean she's okay. Perhaps you might be thinking Junpei is being irrational to be afraid for Akane as opposed to being afraid of her. After all, unless there's someone else on the ship, she's the only one who could have killed them. Junpei refuses to accept this thought, and I can't blame him. We saw how dedicated he is to Akane, and frankly, I don't believe she would have done this either. Logically, she can't be ruled out as the culprit, but the way she reacted when she saw Snake's corpse, I don't feel like that was acting. We need to find her. Tragic as it is that the others are dead, Akane was with them before, but she's not here now. She might be in danger. Lotus grabs us and we make a break for the sun door, desperate to get out of here as soon as possible, and when we get there, the door is already unlocked. How? It was locked earlier and we only just found the key. Was there another sun key? Or has someone broke the lock on every door here? That strongly raises the chance that the killer isn't one of us, and means Akane is in serious danger. We need to find her now. When we get to the door, it opens by itself, and on the other side, Akane is on the ground, bleeding.
Akane! Akane! しっかりしろ! Akane!
俊平君。
血がこんなに。一体何があったっていうの？どうしてこんなことに。
俊平君、ごめんなさい。私、もうダメなの。
何言ってるんだ。絶対に死なせるもんか。必ず助けてやる。
ありがとう、俊平君。今まで本当にありがとう。私、幸せでした。もう一度、俊平君に本当に嬉しかった。
バカ野郎！一度どころか二度でも三度でも何回だから。だからしっかりしてくれ、あかる。とにかくなんだ。どうすればいいんだよ。くそ。なんだ。潜水艇どうしてこんなところにそうだ。待ってろ、すぐそこに潜水艇があるんだ。動くかどうか見てくるから。
行かないでください。お願いだからそばにいて。最後ぐらい俊平君のそばに。
茜。
俊平君知ってました。私俊平君のこと小学校の頃ずっと。俊平君といろんなとこ行きましたよね。プール行ったり、お祭り、雪の積もった校庭で雪合戦したりとか、みんな りですね。
そんなことないさ、あかり。さっき言っただろ。何回だって会ってやるって。
本当に
本当だ。
よかったよかった俊平、私なんだか
ダメだ、あかね。寝ちゃダメだ。
ありがとう俊平君、本当にありがとう。
あかね。あかね。あかね。
I let them down. I let everyone down. Again. But it doesn't matter. I just said again, didn't I? I've done this before. I've failed before. Since this is a video game, failure doesn't mean anything. I just need to try again, and again, and again, and again, and again. "999" was a DS game from the late 2000s that kicked off the 999 was a DS game from the late 2000s that kicked off the critically acclaimed Zero Escape. 999 was a DS game from the late 2000s that kicked off the critically acclaimed Zero 999 was a DS game from the late 2000s. I'd like to thank you all for watching. This video was long and hard to make, but if even one person gets enjoyment out of it, then I think it was a worthwhile endeavor. Don't worry, I'm not so cruel as to end the video here, but I do want to sincerely thank you for sticking with me this far. I know this video's structure is strange, but I want to tell you that there was a point to all of this. At least, I hope there was. I wanted to recapture some of the thoughts I had when I first played 999, and I thought structuring the video as if I only have partial memories of what happens between each sequence was appropriate as a proxy for the morphogenetic field. Before I continue, I'd like to give a spoiler warning. Yes, that's right. Over an hour into this video and covering the major plot beats of 3 separate paths, I'm giving a spoiler warning. This may be an exercise in futility, since I'm assuming if you haven't played the game but watched this far anyway, then no spoiler warning will dissuade you, but I really want you to hear me out and go play the game for yourself. There's still one major twist that I want to preserve that I think adds an incredible amount of weight to the story that I think you should experience for yourself. If you've enjoyed my analysis of 999 and you're determined to know what happens next, then I recommend leaving this video and coming back once you've played the game. And if you're ready, well, let's continue. The game has issues, major plot issues that could and by all rights should shatter my suspension of disbelief. Think about what I was complaining about earlier with not taking the 9th bracelet, but crank it up to 1,000,000. I could easily imagine someone similar to me playing this game and hating it. You could make a convincing argument that the game's internal logic is batshit insane, and that the plot contrivances are too much to accept, and that would be a valid take. I can imagine this because I hate both of this game's sequels. But that's a can of worms I really don't want to open. Despite understanding a hypothetical view of someone having problems with some of the endgame plot points, I personally can't bring myself to dislike a game that made me cry. I'm not going to tell you something like this is the first game to make me cry or anything like that, and it's not as if I'm a stoic person who seldom cries. In fact, I cry all the time. It's not hard to do. But nonetheless, I value crying. I appreciate any story, no matter how flawed, that can elicit such an emotional response from me. The weirdest thing is, at this point I still didn't care for Akane more than any of the other characters, so why did I tear up at that scene and not any of the other scenes of characters dying? I do find death to be scary and intrinsically sad, but the reason I cried here wasn't because of Akane, it was because of Junpei. Crying and laughing are two sides of the same coin, and it's important to indulge in both, and like laughing, crying is extremely contagious. Seeing someone, even a fictional character, crying is one of the easiest ways to make me cry. Granted, if a story is really bad or boring, I probably won't care if a character is crying, but if there's one thing 999 is very good at doing, it's making me care. And I hope I've been successful in making you care if you didn't before watching this video. From this point on, I'm going to drop the pretense that I don't have memories of the other playthroughs, and will explain how to get the true ending as I analyze the game going forward. Before we move on though, I do want to explain some of my choices so far. Most guides encourage you to never go down doors 2 and 3, but they're doors that add so much to the game's story depending on the order of endings you go through, and it feels less complete without covering them. The sad thing is that I don't think they carry as much weight if you've already seen the true ending, but by the nature of the game, it's hard to give a recommendation for how you should play it. Everyone's experience is liable to be different, and as such by the end, you might not agree with my view of 999. Maybe you'll disagree with my criticisms, or maybe you'll think I'm going too easy on it, but I hope if nothing else that you'll understand why I think 999 is a game worth failing for. In order to reach the true ending of 999, you must first complete the safe ending, which was shown off in Sequence 2. Then you must choose to go through doors 4, 7, and 1. This is partially because you need to learn more about the Nonary game from Clover, who didn't tell you everything back in door 7. The reason Junpei came up with his little scheme to choose where he goes after seeing the results is so he can go with Clover and hear the rest of her story. With that, we'll just start right at door 1 since you already know what happened behind doors 4 and 7. When we get a chance to talk with Clover alone, we discuss who the culprit behind Snake's murder could be. Of course, as a player on track for the true ending, I know the answer to this, but Junpei and Clover don't, so we have to draw some conclusions on who might have killed Snake. Since Clover trusts Junpei and Junpei insists that Akane would never have done it, that means the only possible combination of people for killing Snake would be either Seven and Santa, or everyone except for Clover, Junpei, and Akane. The latter is practically impossible since they outnumber them and could easily just kill us on those grounds alone. And when Clover went through door 3 with Ace and Seven, they could have just killed her there, but didn't. One line I really love in this analysis is our character's inner monologue saying,
"Perhaps by attempting an objective analysis of who might have killed her brother, she had been able to distance herself from the harsh reality of his death."
Lines like this show a level of maturity in the writing because it's not uncommon to cope with the horrors of reality by trying to disconnect from emotions and try to be as objective as possible. The key word here is cope because disconnecting from your emotions doesn't make them go away. Humans are inherently emotional beings, and despite what people who think they're a lot smarter than they actually are would like you to believe, emotions and logic are two sides of the same coin. They're not mutually exclusive concepts. It's only by emotionally forcing ourselves to relive the horror of Snake's body that we tell Clover that the body had a left arm, meaning it couldn't have been Snake. If we tried to reject things that harm us emotionally, we wouldn't have realized that Snake was still alive, although this reveal doesn't happen until the next room because our conversation was, once again, interrupted. In the next room, we find a corpse wearing the Zero bracelet. This is presumably the one Clover found in Sequence 2 and is therefore actually a 6 bracelet, but what's more noteworthy here is Junpei's laugh. Clover and Ace think he's lost it, but he explains that this is some kind of twisted joke since he thinks there's no way in hell Zero would be some nobody that got offed so easily. This is an obvious red herring. Maybe you'd think this is the real Zero if you bought into all that weird shit about the mummy on the Titanic since several conversations are built around that misdirect, but it's just that, a misdirect. You could be forgiven for assuming the coffin you find later in Zero's workshop had the mummy in it, and maybe you thought there was something else on the ship given all the corpses at the end of Sequence 3. I'll just clear that up now and say the killer was Ace. Apparently no one had checked his pulse, and since you were killed with a knife and the only bracelet taken was Lotus's, it's pretty safe to assume it was Ace. There are, or were, other people on the ship beyond the 9 contestants, but those are the dead captain before us, and the guy who was wearing Snake's clothes behind door 3. I'm only bringing this up now because I wanted that to be an emotional moment and didn't want to weaken it with this rant. I do want to point out that we see more of Junpei being kind of a sick fuck here, where he casually insists we search this dead guy's body, and is for some reason trying to get the traumatized girl in the corner to help. It kind of makes me more angry that he didn't take the 9th bracelet earlier if he's going to be so cavalier about searching a body. It does make a little sense that he's desensitized to this corpse comparatively since the other corpses were piles of blood and gore, but this is still pretty messed up. It's here we finally get the revelation that Snake isn't dead, and more importantly for us since we already knew, we learn some of the history of the Nonary game 9 years prior. Clover tells us that she was a part of it and that there's a good chance Santa was too. Telling Clover that the words of encouragement we gave her earlier came from Santa confuses her immensely, since those words are very important to the participants of the Nonary game 9 years ago, and makes her believe Santa would never have killed Snake if he knew those words. This means that all possibilities of a multi-person killer team can't be valid. That's less important though, since we already know who killed the guy behind door 3, but now Clover's finally going to tell us what happened in the original Nonary game. The Nonary game was an experiment meant to forcefully tap into the morphogenetic field by putting people in life-or-death scenarios so they'd get an epiphany from being in danger. The way the people at Cradle figured out how the morphogenetic field work is that some people are very good at putting information into the morphogenetic field, and others are very good at pulling information out, and these people also tended to be related. In order to conduct this experiment, they put one group of kids in a control building and the others on a ship, the Gigantic. The kids who were good at putting information into the morphogenetic field would get a head start on the puzzles in the control building and would therefore send the solutions to their siblings on the Gigantic. Initially, the experiment went exactly as expected for the most part. I say for the most part because, as we learned in Sequence 3, someone did die. Whoever this girl is was on the boat with Snake, and unfortunately, for inconvenience's sake, Ace shows up to interrupt the story. Again. As if he didn't piss me off enough for being a murderer. As we help Ace with the puzzle, the mummy misdirect comes to a head as he puts forth the possibility that the mummy, Alice, could still be alive and that it would explain the corpse in the other room. Even if I didn't know he was the killer, that would be an extremely suspicious thing to say, as whenever someone tries to draw attention away from themselves as a suspect before they've even been considered a suspect, that only makes them look more suspicious. Ace is a dumbass. After solving the puzzle, Clover tells us she found a note which was the note we found on her body in Sequence 2. We reunite with the others, and since they went through door 6, they found door 9. Akane remarks that everyone else in her group could have gone through door 9 without her, but Santa of all people was the one most adamant about not leaving her behind. I don't think 7 would have left her either, but it is interesting that she notes that he was the one who was most stalwart about not leaving her. Once we get to the door, we get the revelation of the 2 door 9s, but this time things play out very differently. For once, no one besides Snake is missing, and you might expect this to boil down to debating who goes where because there's no way to divide the group into 2 teams with a digital root of 9 with the bracelets they have, even accounting for the extra bracelets Clover and Ace have. 7 nobly points out that if they split up the team into 2 teams of 3, then he's the one who needs to be left behind, but shockingly, almost everyone is against this idea. Even Ace and Lotus showing a level of character growth. Well, at least for Lotus, because Ace is still a murderer and is likely doing this as a front. Instead, what happens is Santa pulls out the gun from door 6 and takes Akane hostage, demanding Ace and Lotus put their bracelets to the door and leaving everyone else behind. Considering this is right after Akane remarked about Santa's supposed nobility, it raises several questions as to why he would do this. We haven't seen any hints in the other sequences that he would do something so violent and drastic. If anything, we've seen the opposite with how mad he was at Junpei for leaving Clover and Lotus behind when they went through door 3, on the grounds that it was a horrible thing to do. No one is more shocked by this than Clover, who was under the impression Santa was one of the participants of the original Nonary game, and would be sympathetic to people in this situation. We don't have much time to think about why Santa would do this before we hear Snake banging on the coffin door in the back of the room, and this is where shit gets weird.
Truth had gone, and truth had gone. Now truth is asleep in the darkness of the sinister hand.
Junpei gets a flashback from the safe ending and learns the passcode to free Snake. This is the first time he unintentionally accesses the morphogenetic field to get information, but in this case he didn't have to. This was unnecessary since Junpei has access to the code right now without using the morphogenetic field. After all, he learned the code from the note on Clover's body in the safe ending, and Clover explicitly told us she picked up that note after finishing door 1. There wasn't really a need for this to be the point where he gets this information from other timelines, so it feels especially odd when this becomes a major plot point later. It would have made more sense if Junpei tapped into the morphogenetic field to figure out that the bracelet Clover picked up wasn't actually a 0. This is the sort of thing that would be beneficial to learn from the safe ending. Investigating the note Clover had to get the code would make sense without tapping into the field, but the only reason they messed around with the bracelet last time is because they had to in order to get through door 9. With Junpei, 7, Snake, and Clover, they have a digital route for 9, and therefore have no incentive to mess with the 0 bracelet unless they already know it wasn't 0. So learning about the 0 bracelet through the field would feel more natural. Something weird about learning this information is that Snake comes to the wildly presumptuous claim that if the 0 bracelet is actually a 6, then the 6 bracelet is actually an upside-down 9, and that the 3 bracelet is a 0, with the implication that Santa is 0. There actually have been quite a few clues that Santa could be 0, but the only evidence of the number changes is that Santa always went with Akane, which, if their numbers were 0 and 9, this would make sense. This logic seems to be predicated on the idea that two people are unlikely to have the same number, since if 0 is 6 then there shouldn't be a second 6 bracelet, but that doesn't actually follow logically. If Snake's theory is right, it doesn't explain why there are 2 9 bracelets. After all, the 9th man's bracelet works exactly like a 9 bracelet, and Snake's theory would imply that there is no 3 bracelet throughout the entirety of this nonary game. There are either 2 people with 6s or 2 people with 9s. The only thing that lends credit to Snake's theory is what we saw in Sequence 3, where Santa was desperate to make sure he was the one who got through door 3, because if Lotus and Clover scanned and the door didn't work, then the jig would be up. I say jig, but really, if this was true, no one would necessarily be guilty of anything. They'd probably just be confused why they have the wrong numbers on their bracelets. This whole section of theorizing why the 0 bracelet is a 6 is very contrived, and only really exists to make us think there's a possibility that Santa is 0, but it's done in a way that doesn't really make sense. I will give the game credit for acknowledging that this theory doesn't quite hold water, but no character actually objects to Snake's theory, so he gets to just mosey on like his theory was right. For now, we'll go through the second door 9 and make our way to the end of this game. As we make our way through, we end up in a library, which further builds up the Alice misdirect, but what's far more relevant is the conversations you have with your group. When you complete enough of the puzzle, you pull Snake aside and have him tell you what he knows about the nonary game played 9 years ago. He spends a lot of time talking about the technical details of pseudoscience, such as the idea of people who can put information into the morphogenetic field, and those who can tap into this information. The conversation is a lot longer than that, but I've covered most of it when summarizing Clover's explanation. The most important part of the conversation is the end of it, where Junpei asks about the number of kids abducted. The experiment required 18 children, but only 16 were reported kidnapped. Snake tells us that 2 of the kids had no relatives and therefore there wasn't a police report filed. Those kids' names were Aoi, a name we heard Seven say back in Sequence 3, and Akane, and that she was the girl who died. Just in case you've forgotten, since I've been calling Akane her name throughout the video, she's been going under the alias June, so no one else would have realized that she's Akane Kurashiki, and anyone who would recognize her has extenuating circumstances. Snake is blind, Ace has prosopagnosia, Clover was in the other group, and Seven has amnesia. I don't even know what words to use to describe the situation. Confusing? Tense? Frightening? Worrying? No matter what emotion you wish to describe, most players feel something at this revelation because if Akane died 9 years ago, who is June? We don't get confirmation that the girl who died is the same person we've been talking to until a bit later, but yes, they are the same person. This may seem impossible, but we know the June who's been with us the whole game is the Akane Junpei knew as a child. We know this because of Sequence 3, with the story of a memory only the 2 of them would have had. We won't learn how this is possible until later, so for now we just need to progress with dread in the air as we move on to the next puzzle. You end up in a messy room that appears to be Zero's workshop with pieces of the scanners and puzzles littered about. The puzzles involve doing simplified versions of puzzles found all over the ship in order to access a computer in the center of the room. One of the puzzles on this computer will be very important later, so remember this screen. When we get to the end, we find a photo of the 4 men who orchestrated the original nonary game and realize we recognize 3 of them. Ace was the mastermind, the 9th man was the technology developer, and the man with the 0 bracelet was the financer. We don't recognize the 4th man, but he's the corpse we found behind door 3. Although we don't get the same fancy flash we get when accessing the morphogenetic field to learn the code to free Snake, it seems clear Junpei accessed the field here since his inner monologue shows he didn't find this information very surprising, even though he should have had no way of knowing this. It's also here that Seven regains enough of his memories to tell us the full tale of his involvement 9 years ago. We heard the beginning of it back in Sequence 3, but now we can hear and see in gruesome detail what went down and how Akane died. We actually see this through Seven's perspective, so we see some familiar faces, including a young Santa, Akane, and Snake. Seven successfully got everyone out, but when they weren't looking, Akane had gone missing. When they double back to find her, she's been caught by Gentaro and he throws her back in the incinerator. The incinerator is reset and she has a few minutes to solve the puzzle or she'll die, but in the end...
学ランがそこに向かって近づいていく。ふらふらと。やがてあいつはその前につくと、力をなくしたように膝をつき、そして、
After this, Junpei finally gets his confirmation. Before, he hadn't asked Snake for the last name of the girl who died, but he now knows Akane Kurashiki died that day. That's the reason they never saw each other again. He also learns that Santa is her brother, which fits in with what we've learned about Santa. His sister died 9 years ago, Akane was on that ship and died, all the test subjects were siblings, it all fits. The only piece of the puzzle we're missing is how can Akane be here if she died, and why is Junpei here? Everyone else is directly connected to or was investigating the events 9 years ago, but for all intents and purposes, Junpei is unrelated to the first Nonary game. Unfortunately, with water starting to flood the ship, there's no more time for thinking. We need to get out of here. It's time to reach the final door. Once we arrive at the incinerator, things take a turn for the worst as Gentaro overpowered Santa, got a hold of the gun, and Akane is collapsed on the floor. When we check to see if Akane is okay, she says the same words we heard before she vanished in Sequence 2, and died in Sequence 3, that she's happy to see us right before the end. We piss off Ace by knowing things about him that, by all rights, we shouldn't know, and when he goes to leave, he's met with a rude surprise. The last door won't open. He has the 1, 9, and 8 bracelets since he's holding Lotus captive, but the door rejects him. Because he's so flustered at the digital root not being what he thought it should be, Seven manages to disarm and beat the shit out of him. After giving a long-winded analysis of why everything happened here, we confront Santa with our conclusions, that he is Zero and that this was all for revenge. He says we got everything right in terms of the information we found, from everyone's true identities to the nature of the original Nonary game, but that our conclusion was wrong. He's not Zero, and this wasn't for revenge. He did help Zero out as an assistant, and he does hate Gentaro and all his little friends, but this was all done in order to grant a wish. To save someone. Junpei was brought here to help Santa, no, Aoi Kurashiki's sister. When we look to the corner, Akane has vanished, and what's most mysterious is that Seven realizes that June was Akane and says,
倉敷茜は、茜は...
Instead of, where's June? Seven seems to get a migraine, and Santa reminds us that the Nonary game was designed to get someone to access the morphogenetic field, like we've done so many times over the last hour. We learn that the siblings of the original experiment were supposed to be split up by transmitter and receiver, but they accidentally put Akane and Aoi together, meaning Akane had no one to tap into anyone's solutions and couldn't solve the puzzle. It's here we get the white flash as someone speaks into Junpei's head. Junpei learned what he did because she knew. She tells us to imagine a river that splits in 2 directions. Information is like this river, it can only go down one way. But the morphogenetic field lets you send the information of one river to another. She tells us, not Junpei, but us the player, that she is different. She can see the road not traveled and move information from future timelines. Who is she? I ask as if you don't already know.
I am I, the 9th letter of the alphabet, but I am also Zero. No, that's not true. I'm not really Zero. Not yet. Perhaps you could say I am less than Zero. Zero is my future. In 9 years, I will be Zero. I am...
She is Akane Kodashiki, the one from 9 years ago, awaiting incineration. She is not fully aware of how she knows what she does. She doesn't know how she's able to access the morphogenetic field this way. Perhaps it's because she's supposed to be a transmitter, but instead of transmitting to the present, she transmits to the future. The reason you're here is because she chose you. In order for her to receive information from the morphogenetic field, she needs someone to be in the same situation she's in. Someone she trusts. Someone who doesn't already know the answer and can be put in a dangerous situation to get an epiphany. Her brother cannot fulfill this role since he cannot meaningfully put himself in danger to get an epiphany. So the only person who can is the person she trusts most in this world. Someone she loves. Junpei. As all of these thoughts go through our head, Santa gets the gun, grabs Ace, and locks us in the incinerator. He goes out the other door and tells us that he's Santa Claus and...
あいつの願いを叶えてやるのさ。
Everyone's first thought is that we all can't leave through the numbered door with our digital roots unless we abandon Lotus, but everyone is determined to not leave Lotus to die. This doesn't really matter, however, because we saw Ace try to open the door earlier and it didn't work, so it's possible this door doesn't have a digital root of 9. Before we have too much time to ponder this, we get a perspective shift. We see the world from Akane's view 9 years ago. When she tried to tap into the morphogenetic field back then, she saw an adult Junpei going through the puzzles that she made. Before, she had the benefit of other people who were accessing the morphogenetic field as intended, but when she was trapped in the incinerator, she had no one. She was tapping into Junpei's future mind every step of the way. Unlike everyone else who got the information through the morphogenetic field, she had to feel all of Junpei's experiences and fears throughout each route. The experience has been rough on our cast going through the Nonary game. Imagine how horrifying it was for kids who were around 11 years old, kidnapped and told failure would lead to their gruesome deaths. The only thing that kept them together was Snake, or rather his true name, Light. He's the one who told them what the words of meaning for a 4-leaf clover were, the ones we used to save Clover from the depths of despair. The reason Santa was so disgusted by the 4-leaf clover bookmark he found earlier is because those words felt like a betrayal. He was told if he had trust, love, and faith, that he would find luck, and they'd get out alive. But they didn't. The reason Akane had gone missing 9 years ago is because she had dropped a doll that meant the world to her. A doll given to her by Junpei. When she went back to get it, Gentaro found her and, well, you know the rest. But this was not the end. She relived the incineration over and over and over and over again, hoping one day, when she looked to the future, she'd see the solution. As we return to the modern day, the floor opens up and a puzzle appears. On the DS version, the screens represented both of their perspectives as they walk towards the puzzle. Once the puzzle appears, we hear her voice. She doesn't have the same confidence and intellectual dialect as before when she spoke in our heads, but it's unmistakably Akane crying for help. This is it. This is what we were brought here for. If we solve the puzzle, Akane will be able to solve it back in her time. She had to recreate the scenario she saw in the morphogenetic field to verify her existence. The reason we saw her disappear and the reason Seven had a migraine is because her existence is on shaky grounds. We're living in a Schrodinger's cat situation where the world doesn't know if she should exist until after we solve the puzzle. And we will solve the puzzle. We're going to save Akane. We're solving this... Luckily, this puzzle doesn't actually have a timer, so once we solve it, Akane can escape. A part of me sincerely wishes the game just ended here. With Akane saved, she doesn't need to recreate the Nonary game in the future, but of course, if she never does, then she can't tap into anything in the future to save herself. It's a confusing clusterfuck that's inherent to stories about manipulating events in the past, but I'll put that to the side because back in the future, the incinerator is still on and we don't know how to get out. Luckily, Junpei makes a major leap in logic that turns out to be correct. By assuming the 9 is actually a lowercase q, which the game converts to the number 26. The digital root of 26 is 8, meaning if everyone puts their number in, they can all escape. This is the cool foreshadowing in the puzzle I mentioned earlier. In that puzzle, you had to put people's numbers in the correct digital root, which represented the doors you've gone through up until that point. And in the last puzzle, you had only 5 numbers, the numbers of everyone in this room's bracelet, and the solution was to put everyone in 8 instead of 9. As we escape the compound and get to the top, we learn that 1, we were actually in the test building rather than the sinking Gigantic, and 2, our bracelets never actually had detonators in them. The only people the game was designed to kill were the planners of the original Nonary game. One last time we get to see what happened to Akane after she escaped the incinerator, and can be at ease as she, Aoi, Light, Seven, and the others escape the sinking boat. The game switches between the escape of Akane and company and the escape of Junpei and company, as Junpei's team finds a car to drive away in. The car they find actually has a tied-up Gentaro in it and a note saying Aoi and Akane are going into hiding, but we can rest easy knowing they're safe. Gentaro gives us a little bit of exposition for why he did the Nonary games at all and how he started his company, but that doesn't really matter. Junpei's team is alive, Akane's team is alive, and it's a happy ending with no loose ends. Oh, fuck off. Other than seeing Alice here, it's an ending I'm satisfied with and left with a smile on my face. Unfortunately, I can't just end the video here because there is one more thing I need to talk about. This ending is bullshit. Okay, bullshit might be a bit much, but there's a lot to unpack with this ending. First of all, the story is predicated on changing past events, which is always a very dangerous field to tread, because it invites the question of when this infinite cycle began. If Akane needs to create the Nonary game in order to access the morphogenetic field to see the solution to the puzzle, who created it before she did? This is a classic problem of the grandfather paradox because if she created the second Nonary game, that means she's alive and therefore she shouldn't need to save herself because she survived. If you're willing to suspend your disbelief for that, then the rest of the story is manageable, if a bit confusing. First, we need to consider Akane's role as Zero. Namely, what was the deal before Junpei saved her? Does she just get to exist up until an arbitrary point and then can reappear elsewhere, or did she sneak away? Also, is she a top-tier actor when she acts invested in Ace's safety even though he's killed her time and time again? Or is there another explanation? She seemed really horrified upon seeing the corpses of the Ninth Man and the man behind Door 3, which Zero was responsible for, but was that a bluff? Or was she genuinely shocked and horrified? Or did she mess with her own memories? Let's calm down and try to answer some of these questions. To start off, let's consider if Akane was acting. It's certainly a possibility, but the game puts foreshadowing clues to nearly all of its major reveals, with one example being hints of Ace's prosopagnosia being seen as early as the group splitting up to look for Snake. If she was faking it, we probably would have gotten some clues, but the closest thing I could find was Santa saying that the person you trust most might stab you in the back, and this makes Akane frown. Personally, I don't think that's good enough evidence because being uncomfortable about that statement would be natural, and she never really betrayed you. I guess she lied when she said she had no connection to Zero, but Junpei is completely fine with the situation by the end, and when he learns this was the only way to save Akane, he doesn't hold it against her. The other possibility is that she altered her memories to no longer remember being Zero. It seems likely, based on Seven's amnesia, that Akane and Aoi have some way of installing some level of amnesia in others. If Seven didn't have amnesia, he would have outed Santa, Akane, and Snake as the participants of the original Nonary game and beaten the shit out of the Ninth Man and Gentaro. This would have compromised their plans, and we know they were willing to threaten Snake into keeping quiet by threatening Clover, but maybe they thought it'd be better to have Seven stay quiet through other means. It may have been necessary based on the migraine Seven got when Akane disappeared. They might have needed to keep the fact that Akane is alive secret from people who weren't orchestrating the game. This is only circumstantial evidence, but I prefer this theory because I think Akane's reactions were too genuine to be acting, and I think her deliberately fucking with her own memories makes her a more interesting character, but again, we just don't know. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the weirdness with Akane being Zero. Another thing that might rub some people the wrong way is that she kidnapped you in order to conduct the game, and therefore you could say she's just as evil as Gentaro. Sure, she didn't directly kill anyone, but when you consider the fact that this Nonary game exists, that means this is a timeline where she got out alive, and therefore Gentaro doesn't kill anyone that we know of until he's put in this Nonary game. I do think that her motivation is more understandable as it was the only way to save herself from dying, whereas Gentaro's motivation is a lot less sympathetic when you consider Snake can't see at all, so Gentaro's desire to see faces again is a lot less understandable. It is nice to know she never planned to get us killed with the bracelets and the bombs, but there really were weapons a killer could use to kill us. When you consider how many paths result in multiple people getting killed, it seems kinda ridiculous that there were no contingencies to keep a bastard like Gentaro from killing people, especially if his theory that Zero baited him into killing his comrades was correct. The fact that there were no protections to keep Junpei or anyone else safe is crazy, especially when we think about how, in the timeline of Sequence 3, everyone but Gentaro died and he just got off scot-free. As much as you're expected to admire Akane's intelligence for setting all this up, and I do want to admire that, it's crazy to think about all the many, many things that could and did go wrong. Some of the things that went wrong were inevitable, like the safe ending in Sequence 2, where there was a lot of suffering but you needed the information to get the true ending. But that doesn't excuse all the other ways things went wrong. Ultimately, I don't feel these issues bring down the quality of the games. I still found 999 to be a story I could easily get immersed in. The reason I made this video is because, despite how weird and flawed 999 can be at times, I got invested in its story and felt strong emotions throughout the game. In spite of all of its flaws, I think the game's merits managed to shine in spite of it all, and manages to, at least for me, succeed in its goal of making me forgive the monster known as Zero. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please share it with others because that's the best way to get my channel to grow. I'd like to thank Amelie Dore, aka Noelle, for voicing some of Akane's lines earlier. I imagine a decent number of people watching this video already know about her, since her shoutout in her 3DO video brought a lot of people to my channel, but if you aren't familiar with her content, you should go check her out. She makes videos on Japanese visual novels and eroge content, and if you like listening to hour-long videos on these sorts of topics, you'll probably enjoy her work. I also have a Patreon, so if you'd like to make my life a little easier, I'd be grateful for any amount of money thrown my way. Although it seems very doubtful right now, maybe if I ever make enough money from this channel, I can work on it full-time. If you can't or don't want to, that's totally fine. Really, I'm glad people are watching my videos at all, so just watching this far into the video makes me happy. Thank you for watching.